So I do that. So again, thank you all for coming today. Today's presentation is by another special guest we have, who is a volunteer. If you visit the museum, you might often see him. Bob Messer is going to be talking today about one of, or maybe his favorite artifact that we have in the museum. And this very special item has a wonderful story related to Philander Barclay, who many of you may recognize as a local legend in Oak Park and River Forest and the area. So without further ado, I think we will get started. So I will pass this over to Bob Messer.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you again for spending part of your Thursday morning with us. My name again is Bob Messer. And before I start, I want to thank the people along with Rachel, especially Rachel, who helped me with this project. That includes Doug Deutschler and Gary Schwab and Ed O'Brien, the local historian at the Oak Park Public Library. Some of you may know him. The title of my piece, can I move this? All right, there, is about not Philander Barclay as shown here, but his bicycle. And he liked to be called, and called himself, Bicycle Barclay, because that was his profession, and that was his, not obsession, but certainly his first love. And his business in Oak Park, mainly from 1902 until 1918 or so. He came to Oak Park with his family, and you see on the right here the picture of him. He's on the right in this picture. With his family, including his siblings, his older sister, Luan, and his older brother, James. The family came to Oak Park in around 1890, when Philander was 12, so he was born in 1878. This is a picture of him in his probably early 20s. They set up a druggist business called the Sign of the Golden Lion at the corner of Marion and Westgate. It's now inhabited by Sugar Fix, the patisserie. Maybe appropriately, the drugstore also had a soda fountain and a candy store, along with the regular drugs that drugstores have. And he helped his father in his business as a messenger, and particularly a telephone messenger. So he learned a lot about what was going on in the village, the gossip at the drugstore itself, and as a telephone messenger, relaying messages from one of the very few telephones in the 1890s in the village. That's the background on Philander Barclay, which most of you know. The subject for my talk is Barclay's famous bicycle. Anybody visiting the museum, as they walk in, immediately to their left and up, if they look up, you'll see this artifact, this object hanging from not the rafters, but from the wall. And might wonder what it is. And if you read the descriptions down below, you'll find out. But I want to go into a little more depth, a little more detail, and how this bicycle figures into not only Barclay's life and career as the so-called first historian of Oak Park. It carried him on his route to take pictures, for one thing. So it was a critical part of his ability to move around the village and document it the way he did from roughly 1902 until 1908 or so. That's when most of his pictures were taken. He also collected pictures of 19th century Oak Park from a lot of different photographers in the town and village. And as part of his collection, and now housed at the Oak Park River Forest Museum. So this 1898 Columbia Model 49 is the subject, but I use it as a way of getting into other stories about Barclay and about Oak Park. Here you'll see a picture that is featured on the desk just under the bicycle of Philander Barclay sitting on that very bicycle, practically unchanged from the one that we have in the museum. And that's what's remarkable about the bicycle. I think that it survived not only two wars and a Great Depression, 120 years or so, but it survived so remarkably intact and original. So you'll see him proudly displaying his bike with the photo on the right, and sitting on his bike as he would ride through the town with his Brownie camera, which is also an example in the museum, which had roll film in it, so he didn't have to haul around the bulky glass plate negative kinds of cameras that most 19th century photographers had to deal with. He had a modern Brownie camera, sometimes called the detective camera, more portable. You had to send it to Rochester, New York to get the film processed, and they would send you back the processed film and your camera loaded with a new roll of film. So it was rather cumbersome, but he was able to take approximately 600 pictures with his new camera. The bicycle itself, as I said, is an 1898 Columbia Model 49. It's actually a racer model. He modified it to make it more usable in the streets of Oak Park. And you see here some ads. Gary Schwab helped me find some of these and sent them to me kindly. With the classic female figures in the laurel wreath, particularly bicycle racing was big. It succeeded the much more dangerous bone crushers of the high boy that you see in the middle, and it became what's called a safety bicycle. Why a monkey and a parrot, who, I don't know if you can read the caption, it says, "We are having a heavenly time riding their Columbia bicycle." Why that was an effective sales, or someone thought it might be an effective sales technique, I have no idea, but I thought it was weird enough to add to the presentation. Columbia Bicycle Company was very successful for a time, although went bankrupt in 1918. It's still in business. It's the Pope Manufacturing Company. It says Boston, but it's actually New Haven, Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, where they build the bicycles. So it's survived in various forms over the years. But when he bought his bicycle, Columbia was certainly a major manufacturer of high quality and high cost bicycles. These are some close-ups of this particular bicycle. You can see the tread of the tires. Here it says Samson. I'll put this over here so I can use my pointer. Samson embossed on the tread of the bicycle, and much of the wording is in reverse, so that when you went down the muddy streets of Oak Park or any town, you would lay down in a readable form the advertising made clear by the manufacturer or whoever wants to advertise via the tires. This is what's called a badge in the front bar of the bicycle. And you can't see it here, but it says Model 49. So that dates it specifically to the Columbia Bicycle Company from Pope Manufacturing. And I don't know if you can see this, at least in my copy. There's also a picture of the close-up of the saddle or the seat, which is made of leather. And one of those surviving is very unusual, almost impossible to find. And the wooden handle grips intact, the original wooden handlebar grips. These are the kinds of details that collectors, like the fellows on American Pickers, particularly Mike Wolf, go crazy over when they find one in a barn. If you found it in a barn, it would be not in this original paint, in this original condition, though. It would be rusted and in much worse condition, especially because the rims are made of wood. And these wooden rims are not rotted, they're not cracked, they're not damaged, they're in incredible condition. Raising the question of how or why this bicycle survived so much intact. Well, he was a repairman, so he probably fixed up this bicycle. He said later that he bought it used in 1899 for $15. It normally would cost about $75 to $100, depending on the accessories. So if he did that, it was, if that's true, he certainly got a bargain. Maybe it was in bad repair. But his bicycle shop, as you can see here, is at 1112 North Boulevard. That's now part of a parking structure for the Emerson condos and public parking structure. I added this slide of an ad that he had in the Oakleys in, I think, 1918, if I'm not mistaken, 1918. It sets forth his business philosophy about quality service and treating everyone alike. But it also was the first time I saw in print him calling himself Bicycle Barclay. He was a very conservative businessman in some ways. He did not accept or extend credit to his customers. Even the most wealthy Oak Parkers still had to pay before he would release their bike. When he had a successful business, when he made money, he put his savings, his extra money, in every bank in Oak Park in exactly the same amounts. He was fair to everyone, didn't have any favorites. So he was a bit of a character in the business community too, long before he became a character. It also says that his tire is the only kind of tire he carries in his shop is the Pennsylvania oil-proof vacuum cup tire. And it says at the end, I don't know if you can see that, but it says, if you want another kind of tire, you can call around and sort of find it yourself. My tires are none. So he was an interesting guy and well-known in the village and well-liked. He was also probably as famous, particularly outside of Oak Park, as one of the inspiration for, he never joined it, he never joined any clubs. He wouldn't have qualified because you had to be 70 years old to be a member of the Borrowed Time Club. This is just shortly after it was organized here in Oak Park, mainly at the behest of Philander Barclay. Why? He had a great affection for sitting around with the old Oak Parkers and hearing their stories of early Oak Park and trying to record them on an Edison recording machine, these clay cylinders and wax cylinders. Of singing hymns, but also talking. So that's an invaluable kind of oral history collection that he put together. But he proselytized for having these senior citizens, male clubs all over the country. He convinced the mayor of Los Angeles to start one, allowed one to be started in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, Minneapolis, and other towns followed suit. So he was the originator of the concept of the Borrowed Time Club. Borrowed time because of the biblical reference to 70 as the expected life that we all can feel lucky to reach. In those days, it would be. Most of these men were probably veterans of the Civil War, the Grand Army of the Republic, which met in the building that we're sitting in right now. So it was an interesting hobby of his, but one he was very proud of. Another factor in his life and business is the automobile. The first horseless carriage he's seen sitting here with his friend Wright Elsom in 1902. There weren't very many cars in Oak Park in 1902. There were probably fewer than 5, but they were very expensive, open touring cars. So they were mainly the toys of the very rich. John Farson, the banker, Farson Mills House, owner, had 5 of the 15 cars in 1910. So it was more of a plaything of the rich. Horses still rule the day, but the bicycle craze was a big business for Barclay and other bicycle dealers. The post office shelled out some money for a delivery truck, as you can see, in 1915, so the government could afford them. That's the old post office behind them. This businessman, Wright Elsom, seen with Barclay, changed with the times. He was a bicycle dealer, but he also dealt in repairing and selling automobiles. Barclay never adjusted. He was a bicycle repairman and proud of it. He worked with and for Wright Elsom, but never had his own shop, never really adjusted to the motor car, as it was called. And that was fine until about 1908 when Henry Ford came out with the Model T. That was a much simpler, cheaper car, and they started making them in the hundreds of thousands. The first model was 6,000 or so and cost $825. After he made about 15 million of them, the price was about $200. So it was getting down close to what a bicycle cost, and that pretty much killed the bicycle business in the United States and in Oak Park. As a result, Barclay and his sister joined his brother, James, in California, even before they moved permanently there. They spent their winters in LA, Hollywood, And I thought, well, that must have been something that showed that they had a certain amount of disposable income or cash, because their parents died in 1902, and the business was gone, the drugstore was gone. Some life insurance policies sustained them. The widow followed her husband in death just within weeks. So they were orphans, but they were in their 20s. So they weren't children. She went to live with an aunt and uncle in Colorado, and James went to California after the parents died. But by the 1920s, Barclay and his sister, Milan, joined James in California, trying to start the bicycle business, which failed, did not work. Returning to Oak Park in 1930, as the Depression is getting into its worst years, Barclay becomes Poor Phil, as the bar has it now. But that's the references to the people's pity for him, wandering around town, walking late at night, on foot, walking. His bicycle is nowhere to be seen in the 1930s. More on that later. His wanderings took him to places like that were still open, like the firehouse, and he was befriended by the fire chief, William Barnard, and others like Wallace Stevens, later president of the Historical Society. Late night chats into the night, stories of Oak Park, but a figure of pity and of charity. His sister supported him on her teacher's pension salary when they lived at 132 North Oak Park Avenue in the Depression. She died in 1937. So the pension money stopped. 132 is approximately above what is now Oberweis ice cream shop. The building is still there. As you see from his inaccurate Chicago Tribune obituary, he wasn't 65 when he died. He wasn't quite 62. He was 2 months shy of his 62nd birthday. But he did die of an overdose, a deliberate overdose. We can see that because he disposed of what assets he had before he died. He gave part of his photo collection to the public library, Oak Park Public Library, and the rest to his friend, William Barnard, fire chief, for him to pass it on to the local historical society, which in 1940 did not exist. It says here that he lived with a friend, George Owen, at 123 Ontario Street. That is now the Brook Lane Senior Citizen Tower. So I think there might be some synergy there, since that's sort of a borrowed time club in some ways. Apologies to anyone who lives at Brook Lane. But most people probably, the average age there is probably close to 70, I would imagine. It's a very nice place to live, though, I'm told. So look forward to moving in there someday. Well, skip forward now to that from the 1940 suicide in Chicago. The Historical Society is the beneficiary of a bequest, a gift, from the Barnard and then the Hannaford family. William Barnard's daughter, Lucille, married Glenn Hannaford. And they had a house at 251 South Holmes Avenue. You can see with this picture with Mills Tower in the background, so you can see about where it is. That's 4 houses south of the Farson Mills house, or Pleasant Home, where the Historical Society made its home for many years in the 60s and 70s and until we moved into the present quarters. So 4 houses down, this bicycle in a 10-foot crate covered in burlap sat from at least probably 1940 until 1978. And this is a Greg Mihalek, who was a board member of the Historical Society. Unfortunately, passed away last year in Florida. But this shows him uncovering the bike, and he helped reassemble it, but mainly putting the handlebars back on and the things you take off a bike when you're crating it up to ship it on the train. So they restored it in the sense of reassembling it, but not really changing anything. He put some lubricant on the bicycle tires and pumped them up for display at the 10th anniversary of the Historical Society. And his work was on display at this gala dinner at the Oak Park Club And apparently at that time, the tires held air. And it was the prize exhibit at the Historical Society's 10th anniversary dinner. And that's the way it looks today, and that's how it came into our possession. The society board, at the time it was transferred to our possession, voted a lifetime membership to the Hannaford children, but that's all it cost the society. And so we're lucky to have it. It's probably one of our most valuable possessions. How much is it worth on the market, on eBay or something like that? Very hard to say. There aren't any comparables that I've found. But it's certainly worth more things than just dollars and cents. It has the connection to Philander Barclay, the first historian of Oak Park. And it has, although he's a tragic figure in some ways, a sad figure. But I think we can celebrate its survival over the years and his contribution to our knowledge of early Oak Park. So I thank you very much for spending time on this subject. And I invite any questions or comments that anyone might have.
Yeah, so leave your comments in the chat box if you have any or questions that we can get to today. We've got a little time. And thank you, Bob. I really want to commend Bob on the research that he's been doing. Thankfully, a lot with the Historical Society, because we have a lot of information that's here. I say that with a grain of salt because Barclay was sort of a recluse, I think, it seems.
Yeah.
So there's not a ton of things documented about his life, but it seems like you've been able to find them.
He didn't write much. He wrote a few articles in the Oak Leaves, usually about his collection being shown publicly somewhere. His writings, his obituary in the Oak Leaves, which is much more favorable than the Chicago Tribune one, by a friend of his, Otto Feely, the editor of the Oak Leaves. It was unsigned, but it was by Feely. Noted that his life was sad and a strange life, but one that he said he never knew him to read a book, but he read the local newspapers voraciously, cover to cover. Very interested in local history, the older population, the Borrowed Time Club, interested in bicycles, but he was urged to write his own history since he was the Oak Park historian. He never did, as far as we know. And so we have very little print material. We have his sister's poems. She was an unpublished poet, and at least I haven't read the poems in detail, but I can probably see why she was unpublished. They aren't particularly distinguished, but they are the kind of gentle sympathies, sentimental poems that his brother shared. He was a very kind man. That's one of the things that the obituary said. Never a more respected or a kinder person ever lived in Oak Park or anywhere else, the obituary says. So he was admired for his kindness. He started a traffic safety club for children on how more safely to cross the street. Don't run, walk deliberately so this newfangled automobile doesn't knock you down. He, in his own automobile, which he did own, Flanders, in 1911 Flanders, he concocted a sort of basket-like front bumper to sort of scoop up any pedestrians that might be in its way, sort of like a cow catcher on a train. So he had some interesting mechanical talents too that probably bear mention. And for that, he was endeared among his fellow Oak Park and River Forest neighbors. But his passing was tragic in the sense of the overuse of barbiturates, which wasn't unique or unusual, readily accessible, particularly to the son of a druggist. But the 30s, he became increasingly addicted. Elsie Jacobson, who looked at his handwriting notations on his photographs and putting together her slideshow Oak Park Then and Now, noticed that she could tell when he was under the influence of drugs.
That's amazing.
Yes, the writing quality became much more difficult to read. Fortunately, again, for the society, he typed most of his captions and descriptions of his both glass plate negatives and roll film prints. So we have a typescript for a catalog of his, and he did that deliberately before he died. He wanted his collection to survive and be usable. So in that way, he was a genuine historian, untrained, unschooled. I don't think he had any education beyond the age of 12 when they came to the village. I haven't checked all the school records, but I don't think he attended any Oak Park River Forest schools. There's no mention of that in any of the obituaries. His sister was a college graduate and therefore at least possibly a teacher. So his education was limited, but he was an interesting and I think worthwhile subject of the Historical Society's gratitude.
No kidding. So again, if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat box. I think I'm going to scoot over
Yes,
so you can see me maybe a little bit, because I want to give a plug for a new event that we're doing this Saturday. If this presentation has given you an itch to get on your bicycle, perhaps, then for Juneteenth, which Oak Park, the village, village-wide is celebrating Juneteenth this Saturday, June 19th. And as part of that celebration, the Historical Society has put together a new bicycle tour. So you can look on our website, OPRF Museum, for details. And actually that reminds me, I will move on to this slide so you can see our website is on the screen and my email address is on the screen if you have reactions to today's program or questions about anything. On Saturday, you should visit the museum between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and we'll be giving out programs with a map and some information about different sites throughout Oak Park that talk about Black history and throughout the village's history as a village. Some important sites, some important people, and lots of things to explore. So we're looking forward to this new bike tour, and I hope that you will join us. And on that note, we do these programs, our virtual programs inside OPRF Museum is every third Thursday of the month. And our other program, Ask the Historians, is every last Friday of the month. So our next one is going to be next Friday. And as always, check our website for more information and to sign up for those. And with all of that, I want to thank Bob again for his wonderful presentation and all his great work. And visit the museum on Wednesdays. Bob is here, so you can talk to him in person. And I hope to see you here.